The magnitude of this crisis is overwhelming. It's certainly the worst in Pakistan's history, and I think will go down as one of the worst in terms of the number of people affected. 20 million people affected, 8 million people without homes. Death toll still relatively low, but that's expected to increase as the waters recede. 20% of the agricultural input destroyed.
This is At Brookings, a weekly in-depth look at the issues behind the news. This week, the devastating floods in Pakistan. Millions of people in Pakistan have been displaced by raging floods. The nation's ability to provide health care, food, and basic services to victims who have lost everything they own has been overwhelmed, and the need is growing daily. Senior fellow Elizabeth Ferris says help for Pakistan is arriving more slowly than aid for other recent disasters, and she looks at the complex political and economic fallout. What do you think will be the economic and especially the political effects of the floods?
The economic impact is bound to be tremendous. Exports will be down, which generates hard-earned money. Basic agricultural production, foodstuffs, mean most likely that the cost of the food for average Pakistanis will go up. Political impact is a little bit too early to tell. We can expect, for example, that if the government delivers relief quickly and efficiently and fairly, then its stock will rise. But if it falters, if it's slow, if there's a perception that some groups are benefiting more than others, there will be political repercussions.
I understand that the Pakistani military is playing a large role in the recovery and that the civilian government is playing not such a large role. Will the civilian government's lack of a strong response to the floods undermine its ability to govern? And will the military's strong response increase its role and power?
The military is performing very well. It's doing what military forces do best, managing logistics and delivering aid quickly and rescuing desperate people. So its political capital, its stock is going up. Now, whether or not the civilian government can come through on its side to deliver needed relief and long-term reconstruction is still to be seen. If it does, then everything's fine. The danger is if the military looks really good and the civilians look incompetent or corrupt or partisan, then that balance may shift. So I think the U.S. government is doing everything it can to support the response of the Pakistani government as a whole, and particularly to emphasize the civilian nature of the response effort.
What has been the response of the United States and really the rest of the world, the international community?
There, I think it's mixed. The U.S. government has responded quickly, at least fairly quickly, substantially. As of today, I think about $190 million has been committed. Some money in addition is being reprogrammed from that massive U.S. multi-year foreign aid bill.
That's the $7.5 billion that was appropriated by Congress, right?
Right, about $1.5 billion a year. So they're looking to provide more money. In addition is the military response, which has been, U.S. military response, which has been very, very good. Some of the concerns, however, are that private donations are way down. Individual giving is way down compared, say, to Haiti or other crises that have happened. Other countries have stepped up, but much more slowly. Saudi Arabia, the second biggest donor now, with about $114 million, which is good. Most of the Saudis' contribution is in kind, however.
Why do you think that the response and the donations for the Pakistani floods are less than what was sent to the victims of the Haitian earthquake? Is there some kind of disaster fatigue?
It could be a bit of that. I mean, our system isn't set up to handle more than one big emergency a year. But there are some other differences. There's a big difference between slow onset flooding and an earthquake or a tsunami that destroys everything in a flash. We didn't know back in the end of July if these floods were going to be a monumental tragedy of epic proportions, or if they were going to be kind of the normal heavier rain than usual, flooding goes back down, so the onset was slower, so people didn't really pay attention. And there's a difference as well in the kind of injuries that are sustained in an earthquake and in flooding. In an earthquake, you have terrible crushing injuries. So the TV images were full of children about to have limbs amputated or major surgery needed. You know, most people, to oversimplify in floods, either drown or they survive. You don't need a whole lot of immediate medical care. What happens afterwards is the risk of disease increases, but it's things like skin diseases and gastro diseases and diarrhea that, you know, don't have the same compelling image on television.
In some areas, Islamic charities with links to militant groups have been providing aid. Now, is this going to increase the power of the militant groups?
You know, the whole question of insurgent groups' use of relief to build support is interesting. It tends to come in when there's a vacuum. You know, desperate people will turn to anyone for help. And if there are radical groups there passing out food and water and helping to rebuild houses, they will welcome them with open arms.
Some of the militant groups in Pakistan have threatened to attack foreign aid workers.
Yeah, this I think is the most dangerous thing we've seen, that when militant groups threaten humanitarian workers, the humanitarians either pull out, they reduce the kind of aid, or they spend more of their aid money to provide security for their own staff, which means that the effect of these kinds of threats is to reduce the effectiveness of the humanitarian community, which I think is a very dangerous sign and one that people are taking very seriously.
How long do you think it will take Pakistan to fully recover from
This week it marks 5 years after Katrina. And when we have the richest country in the world with massive amounts of aid and support given, mobilization of civil society groups around the country, and it's still not back in shape. I think in Pakistan that we could see at least 5 years, probably 10, before you can truly say that the effects of the flooding are gone.
Thank you, Beth, for being with us here today.
You're welcome.
And thank you for being with us. I'm Ron Nesson. We'll be back next week with At Brookings. At Brookings is produced by the Brookings Institution. To learn more about the issues discussed on At Brookings, visit our website at brookings.edu.